Do we want to take one more, Erica?
Sure. Let's see. We have a question from Mark. He says, I contributed $60,000 to a 529 on behalf of a grandchild in 2021, exceeded the $15,000, I think it's a little higher than 15 now though, right? Gifting limit by spreading out over 5 years. If I want to gift cash to the grandchild savings in 2022, would I still have a $15,000 limit or would it be reduced?
Well, all right. So now we're talking about, now we're going outside the world of of income tax to the world of transfer tax. Now, in the United States, there's maybe three basic types of taxes. One is income tax, which we're all familiar with. We filed a 1040 by April 15th of the year following the year in which the income was earned or accrued, and that is income tax. Then the second type of tax is a transfer tax, typically at death, but you can also have gift taxes. And the transfer tax occurs at the federal level over a certain exclusion amount, and which right now is $12.3 million. And if you're married, that's $24.6 million exclusion. We don't think that that's going to be around. But anyway, but many states have a transfer tax. So for example, the state of Pennsylvania, if you leave money to a spouse, that is, and I think virtually all the states, that is not taxable or an unlimited marital deduction. But if you leave money to say a lineal heir, a child or a grandchild, that will be taxed for transfer tax purposes at 4.5%, and many other states have either pickup or some type of transfer tax. So the question, though, back to the 529 plan. The 529 plan does allow a 5-year contribution and without eating into your once-in-a-lifetime exclusion, meaning that, it is $16,000 now, but let's say for discussion's sake, and let's forget about the 529 plan. Let's say that you give your beneficiary $116,000, and let's forget about joint, etc. So you gave them $116,000. $16,000 is not going to be subject to transfer tax, but you exceeded that by $100,000. Does that mean you have to pay gift tax on $100,000 now? No. What it means is that you have eaten into your lifetime exclusion by $100,000. So even if you're single with the current exclusion of $12.3 million, that means that you will have eaten into your exclusion by $100,000. So your new exclusion will be $12.2 million instead of 12.3. Well, who cares? And one of the reasons that this is really important is we have a lot of clients who don't really understand that if they exceed the $16,000 per year per beneficiary, or $32,000 if your spouse joins in the gift, if you exceed that, that doesn't trigger tax. That just triggers a reduction in your exclusion. And if you are way below where the exclusion will ever be when you die, then it's pretty irrelevant. In fact, there are enormous benefits of making what is called a credit consuming gift. So I'll just give you an example. And let's forget about the $16,000 exclusion. And let's say that there's a lot of money in your estate and you're trying to figure out how to reduce both income taxes and estate taxes. You give $1 million. I always like to start off with a high number just to shock people, even if my practical goal is much lower than that. But let's say if you can afford to give $1 million, and I'll just keep it simple, you give it to your son, say happy birthday, or you can do all kinds of variations of gifts, which we'll get into. All right, happy birthday, here's $1 million. All right, now you have eaten into, or $1,016,000. You've eaten into your exclusion by $1 million. All right, let's say that you do die with a federal estate tax situation. And by the way, the existing law is it's going to come back to where it was in 2017 plus inflation. Back then it was $5 million. So let's just say your estate is bigger than that. Let's say it's substantially bigger than that. By gifting the $1 million, you're eating into your exclusion that will reduce the amount that you can exclude from your estate when you die. So if you gift $1 million and you die the next day, you haven't really, other than the $16,000, you really haven't done anything. But if you gift the $1 million, all right, and let's say that you live 30 years, if you didn't gift the $1 million and you invested that money, say at 7%, that million would grow to 2 million in 10 years, 4 million in 20 years, and 8 million in 30 years. Now, you have reduced your exclusion by $1 million, but what that means is you have got the growth of that money, which is, let's say, $7 million out of your estate. If that money is ultimately taxed at, say, 40%, you just saved about $3 million in federal estate taxes by making that big gift. So I know that that wasn't really the question, but it's a really important item that people should keep in mind when they are considering the long-term benefits to the family. We're going to be talking a little bit more about gifting now, but I thought that question would be an opportunity to talk about it. All right, so now we're going to switch over to the Secure Act. And this is so miserable. I call it a stinking pig with a pretty bow, or the massive income tax acceleration for beneficiaries of IRA acts. And, you know, it got all kinds of good press when it came out, you know, and they said, oh boy, guess what? And this is, to me, the only decent thing that really has an impact on most of the people that I believe it is relevant for, which is the old minimum required distribution age was 70 and a half. Technically, April 1st of the year following the year you turn 70 and a half. Now they said, okay, minimum required distribution starts at 72. And that's really helpful for a lot of our clients. So that's the benefit. Some of the other things are, I actually think, bad. For example, they now are letting the annuity companies manage 401ks. So now you can buy an annuity with inside your 401k. I am not a believer in virtually any of these high fee investments. But anyway, what the Secure Act does is it says, and subject to exception, again, we're going to talk more about this tomorrow when we do the estate plan, but what it says is that your heirs have to pay income taxes on the entire inherited IRA within 10 years after your death. That's as opposed to the old rule when you were able to stretch or defer the taxes on the inherited IRA. Then you might say, well, gee, you know, what is the difference? And by the way, remember I said, don't pay taxes now, pay taxes later, even after you were gone. So what the Secure Act is doing, it is forcing your heirs to pay income taxes much sooner than the old law, which allowed the heirs to stretch or defer the taxes on the inherited IRA. Again, we're going to cover that tomorrow, but the impact, the mathematical impact on that is, let's take a look at Mr. Solid Gray in the chart. He died before 2020, which was the effective date for people dying after 2020, which if you die after 2020, which if you're listening, you obviously will, and you don't meet any of the exceptions, given certain reasonable assumptions, your heirs, and this chart applies to your heirs, not to you. It's assuming that your heir is 45 years old or 46 years old. Towards the end of their life, they will literally run out of money. You die with the exact same amount in the stretch IRA, either under the old law, or let's say that you qualify for one of the exceptions. Instead of your heirs being broke towards the end of their lifetime, they have $2 million. So this is really the difference between your heirs being financially secure or your heirs being broke. This is really an enormous problem for people who have IRAs and retirement plans. We're going to talk about some of the strategies. Roth IRAs are a great strategy. Again, we're going to concentrate on Roth IRAs at 1 o'clock today. And I highly encourage you to attend that session. That it for many people will be the most important session that you can attend. But the charts that I have shown you up to now, and that I will continue to show you, is based on current law. But I don't think that these tax rates, either income tax rates or estate tax rates, are going to survive. And you might say, well, gee, Jim, we have a totally dysfunctional Congress. They're never going to pass anything. They can't agree on anything. Let's even say you're right. Let's assume Congress doesn't get it together to pass any tax law. What happened in the year 2017 is there was a substantial tax cut both for federal income taxes and federal estate taxes. But in order to have the, let's say, budget balanced, or to have it not go too far in favor of the taxpayers, they included sunset provisions. And these sunset provisions say, hey, these low income tax rates, these are only temporary. And this is going to go back to, we're going to go back to the high rates of 2017 in the year 2026. All right, plus inflation. Then the estate tax exclusion, which again is now $12.3 million, that's going to go back to the old exclusion back the way it was in 2017, which was $5 million. And then you add inflation to that. So we really have, again, even if nothing is passed, we have this massive tax income and estate tax raise in 2026. How much of a difference is it really? So what I have on the chart here is, and I'd like you to concentrate for the moment on the 2022 married filing joint rates. And what it says is you could have income up to $340,000, and after $178,000, you're taxed at the 24% bracket. Now you might even say, hey, gee, I'm in a much lower bracket than that, or gee, I'm retired, I'm not making that kind of money. But let's even say your income is $100,000. What that means is that you could actually make a $240,000 Roth IRA conversion in the year 2022 and still be in the 24% tax bracket. And we'll not worry about Medicare Part B, et cetera, for the moment. But if we do indeed sunset in 2026, which is part of the current law, that bracket that you were in, say in 24%, will go up to 33%. So if all the analysis that I'm showing on Roth IRAs and putting money in retirement plans makes sense at existing rates, just think how great it would be if you're getting some tax-free money for yourself or your heirs. Then after you lock in the tax-free money, tax rates go way up and you have this tax-free money, you're going to be even further ahead than the charts and the graphs that I have indicated. So this is really important to keep in mind, that we are coming into a very significant tax increase. And yes, you can do it anecdotally, which some people do. They say, oh, look at the debt, look at all the expenses, look at the wars, look at all the money that we need, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying that doesn't make sense, because it does make intuitive sense. Somehow, we have to pay for all this stuff, or at least begin to pay for all this stuff. Tax increases are one way to do it. But if we can lock in tax-free growth, both we and our heirs are going to be a lot better off. Now, right now, with the $12.3 million exclusion, and even I'm a little bit passe about this, say, oh, gee, with 12.3, you double that, you get 24.6 if you're married. Your estates are nowhere near that. What are we worried about a federal estate tax exclusion or exemption? Well, let's take a look historically at what the exemption amounts have been. And what you see in the chart is, let's say from 2009 to 2017, that's in effect what it would be, that's where it was. Then you see where it is and where it is planning to be between, say, 2019 and 2026. Then it comes back down in 2026. But historically, a lot of you were around when the exclusion was $600,000, and federal estate tax was the key to estate planning, not necessarily federal income tax. I've always been cognizant of federal income tax because that is a virtual certainty, where federal estate or transfer tax is a maybe. But anyway, I bring this up to point out that we very well could end up where federal estate tax is much more important than it is right now. And some of the strategies that I'm talking about, particularly cashing in the IRA, paying the taxes, gifting it to your kids, and then having your kids invest that money tax-free, ends up being a real bonanza to save, just huge amounts of money in taxes for your heirs. Again, we're going to talk about Roth IRA conversions at 1 o'clock. We're going to be talking about estate planning at tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And again, cashing in the IRA, paying the taxes, gifting to your kids, and other forms of gifting are an important strategy. So before I get into gifting, Erica, do we have any additional questions? I didn't give Erica sufficient warning.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. No, I was talking away and I hadn't turned my audio on. I apologize, everyone.
All right.
Yes, we do have more questions from the live room. We have one from Elaine, and she was asking about an HSA, or 529 rather. And she said, I was told my grandchild's 529 would be added to my estate when I die, since I am the owner and she is the beneficiary, even if I did a gift tax return for her with a 5-year gift. Is that correct?
No. Here's a really interesting thing about a 529 plan. A 529 plan, which I think is great. We used it for my daughter. I would say the majority of our clients use 529 plans. It is, it's like a Roth IRA in a way, because you have tax-free growth, assuming the money is eventually withdrawn for a qualifying educational use. But the other thing that's really cool about a 529 plan is it is not in your estate when you die, either for federal or state inheritance tax purposes. And here's the really interesting thing. So let's say that you have a fair amount of money and you have, let's say, grandchildren that you want to provide for their education. In the back of many clients' minds, even though an objective analysis would indicate that they have more than enough money to spend whatever they want and to gift whatever they want, or to gift substantially, they still in the back of their minds think, well, gee, what if the market goes down 40%? What if the last illness is very expensive and I have given this money away and it turns out that I need it? Well, rather than poo-poo that fear, which is a very real fear, whether there's a high percentage of that happening or not, I would say statistically very low for the vast majority of my clients. But with a 529 plan, you can actually take it back if you need it. So it's sometimes called a gift with a string. So the 529 plan is not subject to you're not eating into your exclusion. It's not really deemed a something that will be in your estate, but it is a gift with a string. Now, I have never, and I don't know how long 529 plans have been around, probably 20 years, maybe. I remember reading Joe Hurley, a long time ago. That's one of the good books, by the way, the better books. They probably have something more current now, but Joe Hurley's, I think what's called The Best Way to Save for College, great book on 529 plans. I think he's kept updating that. But anyway, it is one of the only areas that you can make a gift. It's not in your estate when you die, but if you need it, you can pull back the string and get it back. I've never seen anybody pull back the string. So I would say it is a great area, a great way to make a gift. Why don't we take one or two more and then we will move on.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Now, this next question is from Mark, and I thought it was actually quite interesting. He asks, if I file a gift tax return on a gift of $4 million today under the current estate tax rules and die after the sunset in 2026, he's saying sunset of the current level or the current exemption, with more than the gift tax exclusion, does the $4 million gift now count toward the current exclusion or the future exclusion?
Well, you're now getting into a really interesting area. And there is, I forget the name of the law that it applies, but we have found that it applies, and it's very fact specific, and there aren't enough details in this question to really answer that question. But the general rule is, and I think for most people, and I'd have to take a second look, but I actually remember looking at this exact issue and I was getting excited. And then Matt Schwartz, our veteran estate attorney, says, no, don't get so excited. The main advantage of making a significant gift now is getting the appreciation out of your estate. There is a set of rules, and I can't remember the name of them, that might apply under some situations where that could end up being beneficial. And I remember getting really excited about that. And then when we got into the nitty gritty, it really didn't apply to very many people at all. So without knowing more of your facts and with my memory being a little bit fuzzy on this issue, just because it didn't come up until I was reading about it. And then, I always get excited about different strategies and was thinking the same thing. But in general, I don't think that that's going to apply. The benefit of the significant gift is, let's assume that you don't die very soon. Let's say that you live for a number of years, 5, 10, 20, 30 years, of getting the appreciation of that money on the gift outside of your estate that could end up potentially, if you're talking about a gift of $4 million, you're talking about potential millions of dollars of estate tax.